to the first short video in what I anticipate to be a rather lengthy series, covering significant ships throughout history. The ships I hope to cover will hail from all over the world, and across the deep expanse of time, but today we begin with a relatively recent vessel, one that remains just barely within living memory. The passenger express liner France, known to her loyal passengers as the Versailles of the Atlantic, was laid down at Chantier d'Atlantique in 1908 and launched in 1910. Following the fitting-out process, she entered service for Compagnie Générale Transatlantique, known to English speakers as the French Line, in April 1912, departing Le Havre barely 5 days after Titanic was lost on her maiden voyage. While the traveling public was perhaps nervous to sail aboard a big liner at first, France soon assumed her place as the most popular ship on the New York route. As the French ship of state, her interiors were done in palatial Louis XIV style. Depicted here is her first-class foyer, which, while only partially visible in this photograph, featured a flared staircase capped with a dome, not unlike the layout of her recently departed rival. The concept of a central atrium with sweeping connection to major public spaces began in the 1910s and is an architectural tradition aboard ship that continues on modern cruise ships. Here's the Grand Hall, another domed rotunda, functioning as a reception room between first-class cabins and the nearby public rooms. Her first-class lounge imitated the grandest rooms in imperial palaces ashore, hence the ship's aforementioned nickname in tribute to the most spectacular palace of them all. A portrait of Louis XIV gazes across the room, although I do apologize if the image clarity is insufficient enough to make out much detail. The next room, known as the mixed salon, was found aboard most French liners and served a variety of entertainment functions. Elsewhere, though, passengers flocked to France for her cuisine, which many favored over that served aboard major British and German liners. She was fast, faster than nearly every ship afloat, with the notable exception of the two Cunard Line Greyhounds, Lusitania and Mauretania, and while France's service speed was an impressive 23.5 knots, she on occasion proved capable of more. On her sea trials, the French line was extraordinarily pleased when she reached an excess of 25 knots. Barely half the tonnage of her newest White Star and Hamburg America competitors, France suffered a tendency to roll and unfortunate engine vibrations in her aft accommodation that passengers aboard Lusitania and Mauretania were all too familiar with. Modifications were made at Harland and Wolff Shipbuilding in Belfast to attempt to alleviate some of the unwanted motion. It appears as though the fix was moderately successful. Like all her contemporaries, she was introduced with the dark clouds of war already gathering in Europe, and following the domino effect of alliances that seemed to embroil the whole world by the autumn of 1914 in the wake of Archduke Ferdinand's assassination. France was called into naval service as a light battle cruiser, and painted warship grey under the name France 4. She was somewhat unsatisfactory in that role, in part because her size and lesser maneuverability simply did not suit military needs, and keeping her hungry boilers fueled was an expensive task. She therefore spent time as a troopship, and it was in this role, in mid-1916, that France was in a massive collision with the Royal Navy destroyer HMS Eden in the English Channel, sinking the warship and killing more than half her crew. France was able to heave to and rescued the remaining 33 sailors. Eventually, the ship joined the White Star Liner Britannic and the Cunard Aquitania in service as a hospital ship in the Dardanelles campaign, as depicted here. She made countless trips across the Mediterranean, ferrying injured soldiers home from the front. And following the armistice in 1918, she spent the next year repatriating the hordes of American and Canadian service members still in Europe. Back in the colors of the French line by 1920, she proved an older yet nevertheless popular running mate for the newer vessels Paris and Ile-de-France. The economic crash of 1929 and the ensuing global recession greatly reduced passenger bookings. More and more of her time was spent off the express route on leisure cruises to nowhere, and like many of the pre-war ships, she was retired in 1932. Moderate damage from a fire while laid up in Le Havre the French line determined that she was no longer worth the dock fees, and France sailed off to the breakers in 1933, the first and last French four-stacker, and palatial to the end.